Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Trekyards. I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Guns.
And today we've got a very interesting episode for you guys, something that I think a lot of people will enjoy and maybe get a new appreciation for what we're going to talk about. Samuel, what are we talking about today?
Well, we did a very amazing video looking at the Discovery when that came out. This time, there's been some time since that video came out and since Discovery's been released, and some things have happened. We know the design has changed, that's fair enough, but we want to do something very visual and show you, well, basically we want to do a full breakdown of the Discovery, the original version, and show actually how clever and linking to continuity it really is.
Cool, and so we're going to do some Discovery on the Discovery, and discover some things.
That is exactly what we're doing, Stuart.
Awesome. It's all about Star Trek here, and of course Star Trek is all about discovery.
Yes.
Of the unknown, not necessarily the series. But anyway,
yes.
Here we are. Let's get straight into this then. This is, of course, the one that we've already seen. That was the first trailer, the first glimpse we see of Discovery. Yes. As he mentioned, it has changed since then, but we've got an awesome 3D model of it here, so let's take a look at it.
Yes, so this model was done by Barry Chapman. Amazing. We sort of did it on the down low, then you've seen it sneak into the thumbnails. And then I've just done some animations. We know the rough scale of this ship. I had a light rig built by Rob Wonshun, and all the other ships in this are, for the most part, all the original ones from the show, so you get a real good sense of scale and dimension of detail. And so, Stuart, just this first picture I just thought I'd made just to start us off with a nice little beauty shot. Yes.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it.
Because the ship can look good, guys.
Oh, absolutely. This, like I've said from the beginning, I really like the way this looks, and I love seeing this new renders of it because it's amazing.
So I thought I'd do something fun, but I want to take you to the next picture, and this is sort of a mission briefing, but really it's a full episode. So this is what we think of as the problem with Discovery, because it's between NX-01 era and the Cage, or it's after the Cage, but it's 10 years before TOS, so the Cage technology is the one you know. Now, that's where it fits in the timeline. And you might be thinking, well, it doesn't really bridge the gap, it's a bit strange, doesn't... I don't know, Stu, I mean, I don't know if you have that problem, but it doesn't necessarily seem to fit. I mean, why is it a triangle, and why is there no... I mean...
Well, it's a fair question, but at the same time, you got to ask yourself, with the Daedalus class ships, why are there cylindrical hulls and spheroid-shaped primary hulls? I mean, there's different design styles for different ships, different uses.
Is the thing that everyone always forgets about. So I went ahead and I went through our Enterprise assets, and I pulled the next picture together, which is, for the most part, the entire Enterprise era fleet. I am missing the original Delta, Warp Delta version, because that's not as relevant in this situation. But this is the Enterprise era fleet up until Discovery, and then two ships after Discovery. So this gives you an interesting context, and this is the order I believe they are in time. Now this really tells you that, in fact, the NX-01 was the first ship to have a true saucer. So you think of the saucer nacelles as being the default shape for the time, but pre-NX-01 you have a half saucer, you have a partial saucer for the Franklin, you have a Warp Delta triangle shape, you have I don't know how you pronounce that, it was a Castillo something, which is a colony ship, but it's not a saucer.
The Conestoga class.
Thanks so much. And the Elite Observer, again, all Federation ships, all earlier, nothing with, well, the first three do not have saucers, so there are other shapes, guys. It's very not as limited, and I really want to point out, and this will come up a little bit later as well, look at the Warp Delta, the triangle ship. Yeah,
I was just going to say that. I mean, you put the NX-01 saucer on that, you've got the Discovery, essentially. Just the NX era version. So that's very interesting. And I think a lot of people forget that, because they're like, there's no triangle shapes, and it looks very Klingon. True, it does look like a D7 from the top, that secondary hull part, but you got to tie it in with what we've already seen, and we know that the Delta is an actual ship, so that's very cool that you can see that. So
I just like the idea of this lineup, because it's saying, well, actually, the saucer idea is brand new with the NX, and you've got to imagine that there's no secondary hulls any Federation ships until we know the colony, like a dedicated secondary hull that isn't integrated in the same way. Well, that jump is a jump, because there's no pre-existing thing. The Discovery sort of has one, but maybe why would you instinctively say, let's add a second hull underneath our primary? Wouldn't it be more of a logical step to say, hey, we've got this saucer, it works really well, let's use our delta shape, let's use our warp delta, which is also a hull, let's put those two shapes together to create a blended, so double the size of our ship. Why would you assume a secondary hull first? Maybe that makes more sense, and then it evolved into a more workhorse secondary hull. So just the fact that the evolution of these designs, actually, I think people never really did you even remember this ship when looking at this Discovery?
What, the Delta? No, I didn't at all. And then I remember in our discussions with it, you had mentioned it, and I thought, yeah, you know what, we've seen it on screen, so it's canon, and yeah, that's exactly the same kind of shape. So I didn't have a problem with that. But no, initially I didn't think of that. But initially I thought that the Discovery was an interesting Federation design, and I thought it would perfectly fit into that realm of Federation design. So I didn't have a problem with it.
And if you go to the next picture, which sort of brings them all together a bit more, I mean, you can see the pre NX1 aesthetic is all over the place. You know, it's not the saucer and secondary hull style. So Discovery is a totally valid form, and then we get to Constitution, and that becomes more standard style with other things. Although then you're Reliant and Oberth. I mean, just because we see this as the standard, the fleet behind it, I mean, even the Franklin, which is somewhat of a forced in there a little bit because it was never designed to be. But that's where it exists in the timeline.
And looking at this, I mean, honestly, when you look at these ships together, my first thought is the very first one and the one with the half saucer with the weird placed nacelles, they don't fit the Federation aesthetic.
No.
I mean, the half saucer one sort of does, but just the way that those nacelles are placed doesn't. So the Discovery, I wouldn't even think twice looking at this picture if I had to pick one that wasn't a Federation design. I'd say that first one for sure. But yeah, that's quite interesting.
It is fair. We don't know the background of the Elite Observer, but it is a ship that picked up one of the characters in the 4th season, so we know it's at least a Federation. Well, it must be a Starfleet ship or at least an Earth Alliance ship, but it still counts towards a fleet because they're not going to build dedicated transports. Everything's going to be, pretty useful and then mitigated to be an older ship. That's why I think that's probably one of the first classes. Especially if you compare it to like the space shuttle, it's close to a space shuttle design than anything else there, and you're obviously pushing further and further to a saucer. But again, the shapes. If you go to the next picture, this I believe is the natural. I mean, this is the true. It's not a D7 and a Connie. It's an NX-01 and a Warp Delta. And while there's a huge gap, 50, 60 years. It's close to a TOS time. These are shapes that have existed before. There's been 2 different warp deltas. There was a pre warp 3 refit, and then there was a enhanced version. So this design is one of the oldest designs in the Federation history. Is the warp delta style. So if anything, the saucer is new. So why? Of course, you would add a saucer. And if you look at the pylons of the warp delta, they're thicker. They go out in a very similar sort of way. I love these sorts of designs because we can chalk it up in universe for this linking in continuity and design process, but it just happens to be luckily linking in. It wasn't a Ralph McCrory that didn't know about Warp Delta. The Warp Delta didn't take that into account, but these shapes somehow exist in the timeline. And if you look at these 3, I mean, even the scale of the NX-01 saucer compared to the other. It's not even much of a leap.
No, it's pretty much the same size. Almost exactly. So, wow. It should be said, too, that the neck portion of the Discovery has a lot of internal volume, which we haven't really seen in a neck portion of a ship.
No.
Really. Well, maybe Enterprise E and stuff later down the road.
But, sure. Yeah.
So, is that secondary hull actually comprised of sleeping quarters and whatnot, or is it just shuttle bays, hangar bays? I mean, if it's hangar bays, it makes perfect sense.
Well, we know it has a humongous hangar. I don't know. Yeah, probably both. I would assume, or maybe all the science labs are in the neck. Then you have good views either side.
Well, the only thing that really bothers me about the Discovery from these shots is the nacelles. Like, I love the placement of them. I love the size of them, but the fact that they're just rectangular compared to all the other designs we've seen thus far.
Yes.
But I'm sure we're going to talk more about the nacelles in a little bit, like the Bizarre Collectors and whatnot. So
yes, there's obviously some things that link. I just wanted to really highlight through dissecting the Discovery last time and having all these models, actually, that it's not as far away as you think it is, and there's so many things that link between the universes.
So let's talk about the deflector now.
Yes.
As you can see in this picture, you see the evolution of the deflector almost. The NX has that long deflector dish with the blue glow behind it. Then we get more of a saucer type dish in the Discovery, but just mainly all blue glow. Very reminiscent of the JJ deflector.
That is later.
Cool. And then, of course, this is the cage version of the Enterprise, so it's got the much bigger sensor dish at the front. It kind of covers most of the secondary hull. It does get smaller for the production version, but so that's just focusing just on dish with no blue elements. Although a lot of the models and stuff I've seen, they still put a blue glow behind that, where the rings are behind the sensor dish. So I mean, there could still be a blue glow there in universe. It's hard to say, but I don't know. What do you think about this deflector evolution? I think it kind of steps out of the box a little bit for Discovery, but
well, I mean, if you look at retro advancedness, obviously it's taking the cues from both. I mean, obviously it says we're going. You're trying to make it fit, but it is pushing towards a circular deflector. Sorry, so you can see that as a leap. Now you are right. Let's talk about the Kelvin. Yeah, I mean, you're right. The Kelvin. I mean, this is pre Discovery and it's post NX, and they've obviously gone to a saucer deflector, but it's very blue glow. But it's still a physical deflector, but with glowing elements. So again, that you could say it's a link in between. I mean, we've argued before that deflectors could be different styles. So the fact that Discovery has a very glowing blue deflector, but it's lost that dish element. Maybe this is a specific style of deflector, and then obviously the Connie is like, well, we need the full dish version for this. But it certainly links closer with the established tech for that as well.
And maybe the reason they did go with the sensor or the dish that we see in TOS is because it's more shielded, perhaps. There's like a plating to protect from micrometeor impact and stuff, because maybe it was punching holes in the little blue windows in the deflector dish. I don't know. So there's always ways to explain these kind of things, and that's very very interesting tie-in that the Kelvin did have that kind of look. Just kind of wow.
Because that was a really nice true dish, but glowing. It was a nice little in between. So I like that they've definitely referenced in that. But the next part I want to talk about is the Bassards, and we're on the 3 picture. Is the Bassards. Now you can see the evolution, as it were. The NX-01 has these sort of medium-sized, glowing sort of orangey Bassards. Move to Discovery, at least the original version. Again, disclaimers, the original version, the one that we saw, just to show you guys, they actually put more thought in than you give them credit for, I believe. 3 Bassards, redder, but smaller, and our original theory was that as warp engine tech has developed, they can no longer be sufficient with a single Bassard clip. They have to have 3, so they're technically smaller Bassards, but there's now 3 of them. But they're very similar aesthetic, which then pushes into the cage tech, which is a red, but it's completely solid, as opposed to the completely open of the NX. But, and we'll talk about this in a minute, there are these strips on the Discovery which potentially say they have to reinforce the Bassard for this next step, which then the next step is the TOS Connie, at least the original version, which has to be completely enclosed. So if you go to the next picture, which shows the NX-01 next to the Discovery, I mean it's so close,
It's interesting, yeah, and the size of those ones on the Discovery. I mean, it's not, the middle one's not far off from the NX-01, so but I do like that look, and it could be that those the protective whatever they are over top of the Bassards, actually later that tech still is included, but it's in the TOS version, it's actually incorporated into the Nacelle.
Well, you mentioned later tech. Guess what ship actually has this tech? The Franklin. Those warp nacelles have spinning Bassards at the front, and it's not just an open Bassard, it's got lines in, which I think must be a direct link that they took from that. So you've now got, these must be post, I said earlier, must be post NX-01 nacelles, because they are completely different stylistically, and this was a post refit. It's been renamed the USS Franklin. It's been given new nacelles post Warp 4, because it wouldn't be 40 years until Warp 4. So this is the next step of evolution of the nacelles, and guess what it's got on the front? Very similar styling. So what does that tell you?
So it could be that the Discovery took some of the Franklin elements that actually worked really well and incorporated them into these tri-bizarre collectors. The tri-bizarre, I don't know what you want to call it. We should coin a phrase for it right now. And then later we do see them kind of in the TOS era, like I said, they're kind of behind the dome that spins, which the Franklin has as well. But maybe it's just that learning curve of what works best over the course of a few decades to come to the final tech that they end up using for quite a while. So, yeah, I have no problem with the way those Discovery ones look. I actually really like that look with the 3 nacelles, or the 3 Bizarre collectors at the front there. So
yeah, I think clearly the Discovery guys, they took inspiration from the NX and the Franklin. And again, even if it wasn't deliberate, there's links to continuity here, which I think is amazing, and I really like this. So
yes, but we're not done with the nacelles. Let's move to the back of the nacelles now.
Yes.
And here we got a shot of the back of the cage version of the Enterprise that, of course, has the kind of contoured edging, but it's got the holes in it.
Yes.
It doesn't have the ball that we see later in the production version.
Which is on the Franklin and on most of the other versions, but it stops with this one.
Yes. And then we've got the blue glowing elements on the back of the Discovery here.
Yes.
Which I kind of like in a way, that it's at the rear of the engine, but that implies thrust, and we know that the nacelles don't create thrust, and so, I mean, that's more of a tie-in with Enterprise D almost, how it wraps around. Because really, all you see for blue elements is on the side of most nacelles. So to have it go around, to have it on the back there is very... I don't know. I think it would give people the wrong idea that those produce thrust, unless there's like a impulse engine or something built into the back of the nacelle. I mean, that wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to incorporate some impulse engines into your actual warp nacelles as well. So,
well, I mean, you look at this in the correct scale. You know, they're thicker than the TOS Connie. So what if they're designed to really be very, very functional, so that most of it is warp nacelles, the warp coils, but then the back part could be standard impulse, which gives you, a lot of extra thrust. I mean, where are the impulse engines on this ship? Maybe they're in the nacelles, which is a strange choice, but hey, maybe. Now, I do want to point out that you might not have realised this is what's at the back of the nacelles of the Discovery. It's right the last 3 frames of it when it passes by. You can see the slight slant. And I was when Barry modelled this, he said, "What's at the back?" And I said, "I found it. We can extrapolate based on the frame." But it's just nice that it's not a ball. There is this sort of grilling, and again, at least stylistically, it's closer to the cage than it is to the NX or any of the previous designs. There is something even vaguely combined there. But we're not finished with the back of the ship. Let's talk impulse engines. Now, this is something that a lot of people have said, and I quite agree with. Look at the placement of the impulse engines. So obviously NX01 to this, and you've got... Really, it's just double. Same basic idea. You've just doubled it, and there you go. That's the impulse drive on Discovery. And I think I really like that placement, and I think it's a very natural progression.
Yeah, I think the placement's excellent. So are the shape of the impulse engines. I really like that look. Now, having a shuttle bay nestled right between engines, I don't know if that's the brightest idea.
Well, put it this way: it wouldn't be there unless it worked, and it was safe.
True, but I guess I'm using my ape brain because I'm thinking,
Stuart,
wash from the impulse engines would affect the shuttle, and if the shuttle crashed when it was going in, it could damage the impulse engines, or if the impulse engines blew up or something, they'd take half the shuttle bay with them.
Yes, but the ship is sort of doomed at that, damaged at that point anyway. I mean, it's...
Well, yeah, I guess.
Now, I just thought of something. Based on this interesting view, is because the X1 has those very distinct pontoons that are the structural linkage between the main saucer and, I suppose, the drive section, as it were. It's not secondary hull. But looking at this view, do you think then that this is in a sense an evolution? Because now it's got a single pontoon. The pontoon is now the neck. Because again, there is no necked secondary hull ships. So it doesn't make sense then to let's take those 2 pontoons, let's move it to the middle, let's connect it to the top bit. Let's have a single pontoon structural element.
Well, okay, I agree with that in a way, but at the same time, apparently there was the NX refit, which had the neck as well as the pontoons.
Well, that's not canon. That's just Doug canon.
I know. I'm just trying to make a point here.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's the evolution towards that whole new design aesthetic, and then they put the neck in this one, but it was much thicker than we see in the Constitution class, let's say, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. I think... you got to think too. This isn't the same ship advancement. This is a different style of ship altogether. So
Yes.
it's not necessarily a step evolution-wise. It's just a different way of doing things. So
it's like the Enterprises are for most part all heavy cruisers moving forward. You can look at that design lineage, but you can't compare, a Orbeth to a Miranda. It's like, well, one's a science ship, one's a light cruiser. I mean, there's no evolutionary line because there is no evolutionary line. Same thing with this. Discovery might be the next exploration ship, but we both do not think that. So you've just got to look at the general parts of tech, and there are some things, like we've just said, that sort of link, and you could be... I'm sure a lot of you are saying now you're reaching, but again, we dissected this design, and this is what we found. We thought these things in the first video.
Yeah.
We thought these things in the first video, but now we're really showing you what we mean. Yeah.
The interesting thing to me about this one is that there's no impulse engines on the saucer section of the Discovery, like there is on the NX. Now, is that because there's so much more real estate for the impulse engines at the back there to move the bigger ship? And does this even have saucer separation capabilities?
Well, my assumption is that, Doug said he probably didn't even need the impulse engines. They were sort of remnant from the Akira. So my assumption would be that they just don't need them. But then obviously we push towards the TOS. That's the evolution. Now we have the impulse engines, the smaller impulse engines in the neck. That's my assumption. But source separation, I mean, if they want to, maybe, who knows? That's we don't know.
Maybe it pulls out from the neck and there's an impulse engine built in behind that neck.
That'd be cool. That'd be cool. Yeah, sure.
Anything's possible, right? Yeah. Another point that was really brought up was the design of the top of the saucer, how it has that kind of stepped or grooved look, and how it kind of tied in with the Franklin, having like the ridging or whatever they have there, which is interesting. Not sure I'm the hugest fan of how it looks on the Franklin, that kind of styling and why it's there, but I mean, it looks cool. So yeah, I don't have a problem with this.
Although,
does it serve a purpose of some kind, or is it just for aesthetics?
This is the problem. We're looking at both the JJ tech, where it's a movie, they have limited time to flesh these things out, and a TV show alpha version of a ship, where again, they haven't had time to flesh things out. So my guess is there's no purpose to either, because they who knows what's changed or not changed. And I don't even necessarily think they'll be in the first version of the Franklin. That's probably, again, a post refit. But again, stylistically, yes, if you look at them side by side, again, these are both fan models. Disclaimer, they're less obviously connected as you would think, but that really is the only ship to have even slight, elements mid saucer, because it's a little bit difficult in this picture to tell. But in the middle of the saucer is that ring of detail, which is why we link it to the Discovery. I think it's definitely a visual nod. Not necessarily stylistical nod, but visual nod. Like, we have this detail too. Although I do kind of like the idea of having this middle bit of the saucer, which means you have more windows. You can look out and see the bridge, or look out and see... Like, imagine shots from, say, that window right at the front of the saucer looking back. Like, you have your tea and you see the whole ship at warp. I mean, that would be... You can get some beautiful shots. Or imagine if that's a walkway you can do, where you can run, and then you can just see, Oh, it's really nice, yeah.
That would be cool, to see somebody sitting there drinking tea, like you said, and behind them you see the bridge dome in the distance and the Star Street.
With no window.
Yes, no window in the bridge.
Hopefully.
So are these to scale of each other then?
Everything's meant to be to scale. I mean, we were given a rough scale for Discovery. We know the exact scale for the Franklin. So yeah, these are all the scales as they've been brought in. So yeah.
Well, I'm just looking at the bridge modules, and it seems like the Franklin bridge must be set in the saucer a bit more, not necessarily on top. So
yeah,
you can tell by the window placement. So
yeah, the Franklin scale is a slight issue with internal space, but there is meant to be potentially a slight deck above it potentially. It's a whole different kind of issue. We'll do the full episode of the Franklin, but then designing, we'll do the full episode when the Blu-ray comes out.
Yes.
But I want to bring up another thing that, again, some of you might have noticed, but I want to really highlight. Another subtle detail. Well, the interesting about Discovery is that every detail they put onto the hull must have meant something, because they built it in. It's such a quick model that you know what I mean. And this shot I did of the NX-01 with the Discovery. Well, if you look at the pontoons of the NX-01, there's this detail which Doug has talked about as being a sort of supercharger, as it were. We'll look on Discovery, either side of the bridge dome. There's these two elements, which I would say are visually very similar. And stylistically, I mean, I think that's a little nod.
I think it is a nod, yes. Whether they're the same kind of component idea, I don't know, though. Because the ones on the NX seem to go back to the engines. Like, they're almost like a booster for those plasma going back through those pontoons. Yes. They wouldn't do that on the saucer, necessarily.
No.
Because they don't tie in with the engines directly. I don't know. It is cool, though, and it's a great thing to point out, for sure.
I believe they are meant to be the thing. I think in the trailer you see them detached. I think it is those components, sort of oxygen and things supplying. But I think visually, I think that's a cue. And also those grills, which I believe are meant to be like transporter emitters, probably the 4 on the Discovery. If you look at the back of the NX-01, there is a little bit of grilling right there behind the sensor dome, or behind the saucer, behind the bridge module. So again, there is this little bit stylistic, similarity. And again, this could all be coincidence. This could all be very heavily designed, but there are these stylistic elements. This is the real NX-01, and that is a very close replica of the Discovery. So it's something similar. These things aren't necessarily put there randomly, and I just want to point that out.
That's very interesting, yeah.
So one thing I want to bring up, and you've got to think evolution. This picture, this front render is actually really interesting because look, the NX-01, very flat, no secondary hull. It's bare bones. Discovery, 50, 70 years later, you've got the saucer element, but you've got a very small neck and a secondary hull, but also very flat, which has visual continuity with the NX-01. Then you take that to Discovery, then you take that to the Constitution class, you've then now got the full secondary hull. So there is that stepping evolution. It's not straight to secondary hull and then, whatever. There is that sort of step up, while it's, again, doesn't have to be deliberate or whatever. There is some level of, the flat, and then with the neck. It's kind of an evolution. It's kind of a process.
From the front, you see that flat kind of squatty profile on both the first ships, and then you get the more majestic. I don't know what word you want to use for the Constitution class, but something a little bit more substantial. Classic. There you go. Perfect. So the next thing I kind of want to point out about the nacelles is the fact that if you look at the shot from the side here, you've got the glowing blue element along the Discovery, as well as the NX. Now, it's a lot more sleek. I used your word. And more minimalistic in the Discovery. More armored, probably. But it's a nice carryover. I got to say one thing real quick about the side of these nacelles. I love the way these Discovery nacelles look from the side. I think that's such an aggressive, cool angle for the front. But anyway, sorry, continue. Yeah,
if it was more oval, it'd work better. As a shape, it works well. It just needs to be more organic. I mean, all the previous NX class, NX era, versions of nacelles, for the most part, there's like 1 or 2 dozen. They all have a blue glow element. So we know that the original version of the warp coils, like we saw on the Phoenix, have these elements. And in fact, the precursor, the NX-01, has very similar nacelles but less coils. So they upped the coils to this lovely set of emitters here. But then, hey, just like the Constitution class, that has, we can see the Constitution class has no blue glow. So that's the step in between, isn't it? I know the internals, but there's that step. It's we'll still have a bit of the coil, and then the Constitution class, we have to rectify that having no distinctly outer blue element, which then eventually, over the next 100 years, turns back into a blue glow for the Enterprise C.
Yeah, and when you see this kind of look, I mean, it's almost a de-evolution here from the Discovery to the Constitution class. The Constitution class is so much more primary shapes and big and bulky, whereas the Discovery seems much more sleek and elegant.
Very, yeah.
And more in line with like the Enterprise D, that kind of profile with that neck and whatnot.
Yes.
So I kind of got an issue with that kind of evolution from this Discovery era to, but they're apparently built around the same time, probably. It's hard to say. We don't really know what's going to happen with this new series, so
we really
plus
don't.
Plus this isn't the final design they're going with. This was the first one we saw, so keep that in mind.
And it is worth saying that, and Rick Snowback and Andrew Pope both said this, a lot of why the warp nacelles are the way they are is because of the warp geometry, to create that stable warp bubble. So having them be the size, the shape, and where they are is dependent on the speed you're trying to reach and how they function. So this could be a warp 6 ship. The Connie could now be the warp 7, and to have a warp 7 warp bubble, You need to have them up again. You need to have it, the way they are. These are all, geeky ways of doing it, but that's what we're here to do. We're trying to give you the perspective, saying this is not as far out as it could be. But that's just what it could be,
Yeah. And since I'm the captain, it's time to talk about the bridge maybe a little
Let's
bit.
do it.
Let's take a look at the bridge shot from the actual first trailer that we've seen. And you got some details on that bridge dome, which are very reminiscent of the NX-01. Kind of the shapes and those details that are kind of cut into it.
Yeah. I mean, if you compare it to the Constitution class, which is just a sort of dome, it's actually very, very similar to the NX-01. So, again, the visual language... It's not something radical. It's not something too different. And like I say, these things are being cut out. Well, there are cutouts in the NX-01 hull as well. They're just slightly different here, and a bit more.
Yeah, and as we've learned, that was just a temporary placeholder, that bridge dome that they used. So, who knows how the bridge is actually going to tie in? But we thought we'd at least point that out, that there is, I guess, some kind of evolution.
I do think Trek fans are making this, that you can't argue that they just threw stuff in. I think even though that it was let's scramble, I think it did put thought into it. Which brings us into the one detail that is more difficult to rectify, and we have a picture showing. It's hard to tell, but what it is the phaser ball turrets. Again, this is the scale of the refit versus the scale of Discovery, and as you can see on the refit in that orange rectangle is the two phaseable turrets, which is not present on the Constitution class, the NX, any pre-NX. The first appearance is the 1701 refit, but there are phaseable turrets, different versions, sure, but there are phaseable turrets on the Discovery, but they shouldn't exist yet if we take the Constitution class as the gold standard of Federation tech. So this is the one, it links beyond where it should. Just wanted to point that out visually with where they are and how they look.
That being said, it depends on the mission of the ship again. Now, I know it's called Discovery, so you would assume an exploration class vehicle.
I would hope so.
But look at the amount of ball turrets on the top of that saucer.
Yeah.
You've got how many sets? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets.
There's more than the Excelsior. We've had this discussion in the original video. It is very very heavily armed. So
there's got to be a purpose for that. Is it going behind enemy lines? Do they know it might be put in danger? And this is... Yep. I don't know. It's interesting, and I noticed that too right away. That was one of the first things I noticed, that it has more phaser turrets than the refit.
Yes.
I don't know how I feel about that. I mean,
and
they are bigger, but they are bigger turrets, which speaks to kind of older technology.
Yes.
They're sitting up there. They're more, noticeably like a big gun. In the refit, they're a little more subtle. They're kind of shrunk down and set in a little bit more. So,
yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're a sort of proponent for the idea of the TOS Connie having phaseable turrets. Mm-hmm. I know you've... So if we take that as the canon, and obviously now Discovery might retconning a lot of the TOS tech, because we see Intimate Darkly, they have not got phaseable turrets. That could have been their chance to retcon and add them, in which case this technology would be totally valid. But this is the one leap that, again, who knows? It's a very well-established thing for sort of that era. I mean, for these designers, they might think the refit era is close enough to be, yes, it's, isn't. I don't think I'd want them to have phaseable turrets, but what is the difference? Although, to be fair though, a way to solve the phaseable turret equation would be, well, we see on the Kelvin, turrets that are out, but also ones that come up. So why not have phaseable turrets that just come up from hatches? So you've got same tech, but it's bulkier, but it's hidden, which fills in the TOS aesthetic, but then they just need to be on the outside for the refit.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, actually. You beat me to it. But yeah, like you mentioned, I am a big proponent of the Starfleet battles kind of aesthetic that the TOS Connie does have them. That'd be cool, actually. A little complicated, I think, for what they are. But to actually have a hatch go over them, so it does look like a smooth surface. And, again, Gene Roddenberry's vision of not showing our weapons because we're a ship of exploration. Yes. But then when you need to, the hatches and the ball turrets raise up. That would be really cool. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah.
So we have this last picture, which is a fun one I did of the side, just to give you a sense. Now, what did you say, Constanta? What did you call that, Stuart? The colony ship?
Oh, the Conestoga.
Yeah, that one. That's the exception to the rule, because that is a Warp 2, I believe, colony ship that was lost. It's only used as one frame in Enterprise, but there's the model. So that's a very unique ship. But apart from that, if you look at the evolution of size, Federation ships got bigger. very, very naturally. And then the Constitution class is a different sort of big. But Discovery, we think, is going to be a colony ship or a construction ship or something where size is very important. But I love the actual, and again, these are the real models, been brought into a real scene in orthographic view. So there's no distortion of if it's further away in the scene. This is the actual scaling. I love that actually, without even trying, even the Franklin, it's bigger. Everything is bigger. I love that.
And I think it's worth asking you now, because I know somebody's going to ask in the comments. How did we come at the size for Discovery?
Oh, well, fans were presenting these potential sketches comparing the Constitution class and the Discovery, and we might have asked rather insiders, how does this look? And they said, that's about right. So I scaled it appropriate to that.
Yeah, I showed whoever we were talking to, and they're like, where'd you get that? And I said, well, somebody posted it on the Trekyards page. He goes, well, it's very, very close. So that's what it's based on, plus size of windows and bridge and all that kind of stuff. So
again,
we did figure this out.
All of it with a pinch of salt, obviously, and that's back then. But this is roughly all the sizes, and I'm pretty confident with this. But obviously, all the Enterprise ones and the Franklin are all completely true size. Just a fun little shot for you guys to sort of end on. But let's go back to the first picture though. The sort of the beauty shot. I mean, we had a very amazing hour talking about the Discovery last time, and every time we thought we knew something, we pointed something new out. And now I'm playing with it in 3D and be able to do these renders. This first version, I am more for, and while it does break some rules and it does go different, and you can argue, hey, Ralph McQuarrie has said no for a reason. If you look at the actual established continuity, the warp delta, all these things, it's not as far out as people believe, and I really hope that this episode has helped to show our audience it might actually work.
Yeah, and they've put thought into it. They don't just slap things together for you guys. They do they try to think things through and actually offer up a in-universe ship that fits. So I really appreciate that fact. But I do want to point out that this ship has changed, and it will not be what you see on screen.
No.
But we really like this ship. We wanted to talk about it, and it's a nice fill in the gap until the actual show comes out, so you have something to watch and learn about this great design, which I think will be included in Star Trek history forever now. Even since they don't really use this one, I think this is a nice fit, and I'm all for it.
Hey, we know the classic Star Trek Phase 2, this could be the equivalent of the Phase 2 Enterprise. This is the Phase 1 Discovery. It's the prototype version, and then the one, which we haven't seen the final, but whatever they come up with, hopefully it'll be excellent. Hopefully they'll think about every little detail. Hopefully they'll watch this episode and say, hey, they thought this, and this, we should put that back in, or we should, who knows. But this ship, my first thought was, wow, it's Ralph McQuarrie, but as time and time has gone on, and breaking it down like this, life imitates art, because Ralph McQuarrie was its own thing, Warp Delta was its own thing, yet they somehow both end up in Trek, because Ralph McQuarrie's design is in the Starship Space Dock in the third movie, which is a canonical, so that shape continues into post this timeline. So these shapes exist in the Trek universe, life is imitating art here, and I just wanted to show it with new art.
And I think this picture points out something that I just want to mention too, that the sizes and shapes from this to the Ralph McQuarrie are quite different. Especially secondary hull-wise. You got to think that this is a lot smaller than Ralph McQuarrie's. So a lot of people are comparing them tit for tat. They're exactly the same. I hate that. And you just look at it, and it's scaled down a little bit in this one. So I just got to point that out. Yes. I really got a new appreciation for it, seeing it in 3D more like this. So I really like to thank both Barry and yourself, Samuel, for putting
Rob for doing the
Rob Bunchun, for putting these renders together, because they look fantastic. And this is one of my new favorite Trek ships, whether anybody agrees with me or not. So
yeah, it was definitely fun to get to play with her in 3D and make all these great animations. We're going to include the Franklin, because we've spent a while in episodes trying to bring her into the universe, and she does work. So Trek is getting more interesting by the day. I think that closes out this very special episode of Trekyards.
It does. So please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget about that. And if you can check us out on Patreon, please do so. That would be greatly appreciated. Or just head on over to the Trekyards.com and click on the donate button. And anything you can do to help us out would be awesome.
So until next time, guys, I am Commander Coggins.
And I'm still Captain Foley.
We'll see you next time, guys.
Bye, everybody.